well. So, without further ado, let's move forward to another interesting session where we will explore the topic which has the potential to transform the way we interact with Google APIs.
We have a captivating speaker with us here today, who is an author, consultant, director, developer advocate at Harness. He possesses vast knowledge and proficiency in his field, Mr. Kamesh Sampath.
He has been an open source contributor for more than a decade. As part of his developer philosophy, he strongly believes in learn more, do more, and share more. With his deep understanding of workload identity and its application to Invoke Google APIs, he has become an authority in the domain. Please welcome Mr. Kamesh Sampath.
Good. Hello? Hello? I think I was also sleeping around here because of the good feast that Antriksh gave me today. It's probably one of the best lunches I have ever had with the GCCD or DevFest. Thank you, Antriksh, for that. I'm running short of time, so I want to rush few slides. But definitely I'll share the slides, what I'm going to do with this. But before I go further, so if you want to connect with me after the session, so I do have my website where you can go. I have my social handles there. You can ping me on any of them. I'll be happy to answer any questions around GKE, Kubernetes. By the way, what is GKE? Can I have a loud shout? What is GKE? Google Kubernetes Engine? Yes? All right. So I have very few yes. So somebody who doesn't know Kubernetes, there's going to be a lot about Kubernetes today. So excuse me for that, but I'll happy to take your questions later. All right. So what's next? What's Google Cloud API is all about? I think many of you already know, but just I want to skim and start saying, okay, what it is all about. So everything we interact with Google Cloud is all through APIs. Through Web Console, write a command using G-Cloud, or do anything around your connections, the services, calls, and everything using is what is called as Google Cloud API. Everything is API, right? And what does, for example, today we are going to talk more about GKE and how things works on GKE applications, etc., etc. So to interact with that, obviously we go through what is called as principles or credentials. So principles could be user, Google group, service account, you name it, right? Your email ID or whatever it is. And you get your own permissions basically to go kind of interact with them, right? So roles and permissions. So going further into what's credentials, what you're going to drill down today, right? Especially from an application point of view, what is something which you use very frequently when you call something, right? So what we call with an application is usually a service account. Right? Probably you would have seen a service account, you would have downloaded your JSON file if you're using Google Cloud Platform to kind of interact with Google Cloud, right? That is something which plays a very key role. But how do you use your service account? Obviously using static key JSON files. Many of you would have seen that, right? You have downloaded the static key, put somewhere, set an environment variable called as Google application credentials, right? I hear a few words, somebody is saying that, right? So we use an environment variable called as Google application credentials and set it to a JSON file or API key or whatever you set it as and call the services end of the day. So that is a very bare minimum to call any Google API from your application, right? But using these kind of mechanisms has lots of shortcomings, right? That's what I call as static key shortcomings. The no expiry thing, I think the last release of Google Cloud IAM has changed this. We can now control the expiry. I think so. That's what I heard from another GDE past time. And you have to do a manual rotation, right? If you're on an organization where there is some kind of a policy or a constraint that needs that you have to rotate your keys, you have to do it manually, right? When you do that, what happens basically is leads to what I call as a cascading effect. Let's say I have hundreds of services using my particular key. Then you have to go to each and every of those consumers and tell them change your key, right? That's the biggest drawback of using what is called as a static key. The third one important thing is that whenever you are on Google Cloud, probably when you're taking your Google Cloud training or certification or whatever you name it, so everywhere they say, always follow the policy of least privilege, right? Give only what is needed. Usually I recommend that start with nothing, and then whenever you hit an error, start adding those permissions slowly, fine-grained permissions, all right? So, but in a way, if you think for a second and see what this particular workload identity does for you, right? Basically, it goes and identifies yourself as this particular person who is allowed to access this service. That's as simple as that, right? So what if I lost my key? And then that's what we saw about all those effects that we saw earlier. So, but is there a way by which I can go identify myself without using keys? And yes, that's what workload identity stands for. In the workload identity, what happens, what we're talking all this time is all about applications and how applications goes and talks to another service in Google Cloud, right? So in that case, what your application has to go by itself and identify that I'm this particular person, so can you allow me to access this service? That's all it's needed, right? And it's one of the recommended ways that Google says. We'll say why it is recommended. But before that, we'll see what happens behind the scene when workload identity happens, right? I'm taking an example of GKE here. So in GKE, any Kubernetes thing, every pod runs with what is called as a service account. We call that as KSA in short. It stands for Kubernetes Service Account. And then what happens, we already have Cloud IAM, where you define your policies, roles, create your service accounts, etc., etc. And then they have an access to respective services, right? So all we are going to do right now using workload identity is that you're going to make your Kubernetes service account impersonate itself as a Google service account, or in short, we call them as GSA. Anywhere in the documentation, if you read KSA and GSA, both of them stands for Kubernetes service account or Google service account. So as simple as that, what you're going to do is like you're going to take KSA, which is kind of configured with your pod, and then impersonate as a Google service account and call the service. We'll see a demo in a short second. But what are the advantages of this, right? When you use workload identity, the very first advantage is that I don't need to configure Google application credentials, which means I don't need the service account JSON file together. When I'm on GCP, and you can even do a workload identity federation as well, but that's a huge topic of itself. But in this case, I don't need to configure that, which means we don't need that. For example, one of the biggest use of that I see is, I think Kamesh was talking about CI/CD and security and all that stuff, right? So where your developers, when you're using CI/CD, you don't need an access to the external service that's going to run in production because you're unnecessarily exposing your keys to your developers, right? That's one of the places where you can apply workload identity and start running a CI/CD to use these services through IAM console, right? And short-lived tokens. So what I mean by this is that the tokens that is generated by these keys, right? Authentication kind of impersonation or short-lived. I think it's 60 minutes max. I think we can configure this again, all right? And then we have a centralized management of ACL and RBAC. And your RBAC and ACLs is centralized managed, meaning to say like your ops person can manage everything from your GCP console. It's one place where I go configure each and everything, right? And also we can have fine-grained access control in case I need to add another permission or I need to add another service. All I have to do is like I have to get inside the console and then do the stuff, right? There's nothing more than that we need to do. Your application doesn't need to be redeployed, or we don't need to do anything else, all right? So application, we'll see this one application right now, and if I have time, I'll show you another application as well. So calling services without key, that's one primary application that we're going to see. So what we're going to do now, I'm having Kubernetes application deployed, and it's going to use our translation service to call the service, all right? And the translator is a GSA, Google Service Account, which is going to be used. And there is a service account called as Lingua Greeter, which is basically going to impersonate translator to call the service account. We'll do two scenarios. One we'll call without that and see what happens. And then we'll apply this one again and then see what happens again, all right? So let's jump to my demo. I guess so, all right. So this is what you see on my screen. It's a very unusual way of starting any presentation is seeing an error there. So I'm just going to give a greeting to my name itself. I'm just going to call this again. And then obviously we are going to see an error. It says internal server error. Let's go to the log and see what happens. Is that clear from the back or need to blow it up? Okay, great. So let me go to the log and see what happened in the log. And if people can read it from there, it says request has invalid credentials. Okay. So because there is no credentials that has been summed. So how do I check that? So let me check the environment variables of the pod, kubectl, kget set env. Okay, and I'm going to use the pod name, thing and list. Let's see, this pod doesn't have any environment variables, which means that the usual environment variables that we have with this pod is Google application credentials. I have not set that out, right? Which means that obviously the application is tend to fail. Okay, so that's the reason why we see this particular error here. Okay, what you see here, invalid credentials. How do I fix this? It's pretty easy. So what I'm going to do right now, I'll also go open another window to show you how my kget SA, that's I told you CD, okay, then kget SA, YAML. So this is service account which is getting used. If you saw the presentation sometime back, this is what I need to use to kind of call this application. Okay. So this particular service account doesn't know how to impersonate itself as what I call here. Let's go to IAM console, and if I see here, so this is very small. Is it readable? Okay. So I'm kind of using this translator, this particular account. So this has permissions to Cloud Translation API user, which means that I can go call the API translation service. All right. And artifact registry user, we are not going to see this today. So let's come back and then go what I need to do here. If people are proficient with Kubernetes, so I'm going to use customize here and then kind of apply this patch. So if it is this particular thing, I'll again go back to the YAML in a second. So I'm just going to patch the YAML to go and use this particular service account to use Google service account. So this is annotation that we need to use, and then the mapping Google translator, Google service account that we need to use for the service to call. All right. So let's go here, and then I say customize, build, and apply. Okay. Once I do this, give us for a few seconds. All right. So you see there is one thing that got configured, the service account. Let's go and invoke it again, the same command that we did last time. And you should see this one coming up here, right? So if you remember, this particular service account has permissions to go call your translation API. All right. So let's go and refresh our stuff here. Go back to the browser, go to our application, and then refresh back. Okay. I think somewhat try to manage with Marathi here. I'm not sure it's right. People, you have to say yes or no. Okay, so this is typical Google translation that we are used right now, which gave you an error, but I've not redeployed the application. I've not injected any service account JSON file. I've not done anything. All I did is just did a mapping between my Google service account and the service account that I need to use to call the service. So this is what this workload identity is all about. When you are running a workload, be sure to make a service account for your pods, and the application runs with that particular service account, map it to whichever service account in a Google service which you want to call. And that's all you need. Tomorrow when I say like, okay, this guy is going out of my organization, what I need to do, go back and pass this particular thing and take the service account out. Finished. That's all. So you'll not be having any access. So it's so easy as that. Even somebody tries to attack your thing by through something kind of a brutal attack or some kind of an attack, all you have to go is plug out all the permissions through your Google Cloud Console, and the node service can no longer access any of the Google services that is configured to. All right? So this is as simple as that. So, and that's all we have to do. There is no redeploy of the application. You can still see that there is no logs here. There's only one log we got after the last error, which is calling this particular service through your web browser. All right? So I have a couple of more minutes, so I can use that to kind of run through one other application. What we have here, DevOps and GitOps. So how many of you heard the term GitOps? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, there's a lot of people. Okay, all right. So what it basically means, exactly, Kamesh was talking today morning about CI/CD, and Roman did that. So one of the common mistakes that we do with CI/CD is that we mix CI for CD. What I mean by that, you write your pipeline files and then you have your deployments also configured. Let's say deploy to Google Cloud Compute Engine or Cloud Run or whatever it is inside your CI pipeline. The disadvantage of this particular approach is what I listed here, but one main disadvantage is that in today's world, we are all hybrid cloud. What I mean by that, I can use Google, plus Amazon, plus Azure, plus my private data center, everything put together. So whenever I expand my cloud or my deployment thing, then your CI pipelines become complicated. So in a cloud world, always separate CI and CD. So what CI has to do, CI has to just build their application, make it as a container image, push it into the registry, that's all. Take your source code, on commit, do a build, push it inside Google Artifact Registry or any other container registry of your wish, and then CI, CD has to come in and then do the deployment. And that's what GitOps comes into thing. Like what you mean by here is a version continuous deployment. The biggest advantage of GitOps is that anytime something goes wrong, everything is versioned inside Git, so I can take it out, apply the manifest again, and do the whole job. It's as simple as that. Right. So I'm not, since I'm running out of time, I have to cut short this, but obviously I'm available for offline to talk about more about GitOps. So this is another big application of when I use workload identity. For example, I did everything manually here. So what I can do, I can write a pipeline, and then the pipeline can take an application, build it, and push it into Google Artifact Registry. And then something I taken from Google Artifact Registry, and do whatever I did manually could be done with pipelines. Actually, I have a pipeline demo, but since I have a lesser time, I cannot show that to you. But whatever I showed you manually right now could be completely automated with using workload identity. Again, workload identity plus CI plus GitOps together. All right. So this is in short. There are two major projects which does GitOps for you. One is Argo CD, another one is Flux. So both of them works a lot with Argo CD. Whenever you commit some code, your manifest gets applied, like what I did, like kubectl apply, you can do it outside. All right. I think I ran out of time, so I'm going to leave with this slide. I think this has the slide deck which I shared with you. You can just take a snap or get it shared with you through the organizers as well. The slide has lots of resources. Let me go back one second for a lot of things which I talked about. Please do take time to read, and you can ping me back for all those questions. With that, I'm saying thank you so much. And after this lunch and a heavy lunch session, you are alert and answering my questions. And first time in Pune again. Thank you so much, and have a great session ahead.
Thank you so much, Kamesh sir, for delivering an exceptional talk on workload identity.
So now I would like to request Mr. Faizan Akhtar to please come on the dais and felicitate the speaker.